I want to thank Jamie Raskin for introducing something that back in 2017, he, as our lead on the impeachment of Donald Trump at that point, recognized the need for what Congress hasn't addressed in more than 50 years to amend the 25th Amendment so that appropriate individuals, including doctors and psychiatrists, who could examine in detail and then report back to the cabinet members, including the vice president, about the capacity of the president to do his job. That's what the 25th Amendment is all about. If the president becomes incapacitated in any way. Dr. Schwartz from my district wrote about that back in 2017 as well, and not making comment or indicating that
Welcome to Dr. John Podcast. So this is happening right. Now, Trump was caught on a hot mic revealing unscripted, unfiltered frustrations about his administration, turning a private moment into a public reckoning. The latest in a long history of hot mic disasters, this one cuts through the carefully crafted image to expose something genuinely revealing beneath. So here's exactly what went down. And trust me, the details matter way more than you might think at first glance. Trump was wrapping up what seemed like a routine event at the White House. A roundtable discussion with farmers of all things, just the kind of photo op that administrations do all the time to show they care about agriculture and rural America. Reporters were being shuffled out of the room.
He was a patient, but just pointing out what are the salient facts that people should recognize about competency and when people need assistance and help. I commend Jamie Raskin. I'm proud and honored to join with him because in these times, especially in this time of crisis, it's extraordinarily important that we make sure that the person who has his finger on the button and can declare war is mentally competent enough to carry it out. And that assessment should not be done by politicians. It should be done by doctors, and it should be done by psychiatrists who then report back to the respective agencies to get the job done the way the 25th Amendment intended it to be.
The standard procedure when the official business is over and the president wants to have some private conversation with his staff or the remaining participants. And this is the key moment right here. The instant when Trump apparently convinced himself that the cameras were off and the microphones were dead. He thought he was in the clear, thought he could speak freely without any consequences, without any of his words ending up on the evening news or plastered across social media. But that's exactly when people say the real stuff, isn't it? That's when the mask comes off. Every single time, for every single person. Not just politicians, not just public figures, but all of us. The moment we think nobody's watching, that's when our true feelings leak out, unfiltered and raw.
Right. With that, let's also tell you how U.S. President Donald Trump has been facing political pressure in his own country as the Democrats have now escalated efforts to question his fitness for office. Well, more than 85 House and Senate Democrats are now calling for Trump to be either impeached or removed through the 25th Amendment. This move comes after Trump's recent remarks, including a whole civilization will die tonight, in a clear reference to Iran. Lawmakers have now introduced a striking proposal tied to the 25th Amendment, aiming to create a formal mechanism to assess whether Donald Trump can still serve. Under the proposal, congressional leaders will each appoint 2 members. It would include 4 former high-ranking executive branch officials, specifically vice presidents, secretaries of state, defense and treasury, attorneys general, and, of course, surgeon generals. The panel will include a final chair as well, selected by the commission itself, potentially a physician or a senior statesperson.
Exactly as they are. And what came out of Trump's mouth in that moment of supposed privacy was nothing short of astonishing. He started ranting, and I mean genuinely ranting, practically panicking about how he simply cannot get his own people appointed to jobs anywhere in the government. He said it himself in his own voice on tape that would later go absolutely viral across every platform imaginable, that he cannot appoint anybody. He complained that everybody he's appointed, their time has expired, then they're in default, then they're losing. Let that sink in for a second. The President of the United States live on a hot mic saying the word losing out loud for anyone with a live feed to hear. This is a guy who has spent his entire political career, literally his entire brand, selling himself as the ultimate winner, the guy who never loses, the strong man who always comes out on top no matter what the odds are.
But removing Donald Trump remains unlikely, as this process requires the vice president, in this case of J.D. Vance, to agree with the commission's findings. Congress will then need a two-thirds majority vote in both chambers to make any removal permanent. Now, the 25th Amendment, remember, was formulated in 1967 after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It ensures a legal mechanism designating a head of state when the president is disabled or dead. It also includes provisions for both voluntary and involuntary removal of a president. The 25th Amendment was used by George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan for medical treatment. Now, supporters argue this legislation is about preparedness and not politics. The proposal comes as the Senate votes on Wednesday to curb Trump's Iran war powers and ahead of the November midterms that will determine Trump's power in the final 2 years of his presidency.
That's the pitch he's been making to the American public for a decade now, across countless rallies and interviews, through merchandise and slogans and campaign promises. The whole thing is built on this image of invincibility, of total control over every situation. And then the second he thinks nobody's recording him, he's basically confessing that things are falling apart behind the scenes, in his own words, with his own voice, on tape that would eventually be heard by millions. Nobody forced him to say it, nobody tricked him into it, it just slipped out the way real feelings tend to do when you think the coast is clear and nobody's watching. Now, this isn't some isolated incident that happened out of nowhere, some random gaffe you can just laugh off and forget about.
And my colleague Susan Tehrani joins us live from New York at the moment to get us more on this. Susan, the Democrats, of course, upping the ante against Donald Trump as far as the Iran war is concerned. There is a lot of talk about the 25th Amendment being used. Get us more on how, now, of course, the opposition Democrats are planning to take this forward.
Yeah, this is just another, to be honest, blockbuster production brought to you by the same people that carried out 2 impeachments against the president during his first term, and then that January 6th commission that just dragged on, and an absolute nothing burger, for a lack of a better term, to waste everyone's time and resources. As you mentioned, the 25th Amendment was put forth in case the president gets assassinated, is sick, is injured. It wasn't put forth for someone to be removed from office because the other party simply doesn't agree with their policies. And as you mentioned, it's not only that both houses are controlled by the Republicans right now, the Democrats know this isn't going to go anywhere.
This is part of a pattern that goes back years, honestly decades, if you really stop and think about all the moments that have come before. Remember the Access Hollywood tape, the one that basically set the template for everything that's happened since. Back in 2005, Trump got caught on a bus, microphone still hot, bragging about grabbing women without their consent, saying that when you're a star, they let you do it. That tape didn't come out until 2016, right in the middle of his first presidential run, and it nearly ended his entire campaign overnight. Both parties, Republicans and Democrats alike, called it horrific at the time, and that's really saying something given how divided everything was even back then. That's the bar we're talking about here, the level of hot mic disaster that almost derailed a presidential campaign entirely. But that's old news at this point, ancient history to some people, something from almost 20 years ago now. So let's talk about more recent stuff, because this pattern hasn't gone anywhere and shows absolutely no signs of stopping. Just last summer, Trump actually got caught cursing on camera, and not even through a hot mic this time, just straight up on live television in broad daylight. Mic intentionally on, camera rolling, venting about Iran and Israel breaking a ceasefire he had just personally brokered days earlier. He looked right at reporters reporters and dropped an actual curse word describing how the two countries were behaving, with the presidential seal practically in the shot behind him. That's not even a hot mic slip, technically. That's just Trump being Trump, except this time news anchors across the entire country had to figure out live in real time whether they were even allowed to air the actual word on television. It was unprecedented, a sitting president using that kind of language on camera, and historians were quick to point out just how unusual it was in the context of presidential history. So you put all of this together, the Access Hollywood tape from 2005, the curse word about Iran and Israel from last year, and now this brand new hot mic meltdown about losing and not being able to appoint anybody, and you start to see a real pattern here. This is a guy who talks one way in public, all confidence, all swagger, all winning, and talks a completely different way the second he thinks the mic is dead or the cameras have stopped rolling. And that's exactly what's got people fired up right now, all over social media, all over cable news, all over this country, because this isn't just some embarrassing gaffe you laugh at for 5 seconds and forget. This is Trump live, unscripted, admitting frustration and failure in a way he would never ever say on purpose, in a way his entire team spends every single day trying to prevent from happening. This is the real deal. This is what he actually sounds like when the performance stops and the cameras think they're off. So stick around, because we're about to break down exactly what set this off, why it matters way more than people online realize, and why this hot mic moment might honestly be one of the most revealing things Trump has said in his entire second term so far. Because once you understand the actual fight behind this clip, the whole thing looks a lot less like a random gaffe and a lot more like a genuine crack in the armor of a guy who built his entire brand on never showing weakness. Alright, so let's actually dig into what's going on here, because most people who saw the clip online just laughed at the losing line and moved on with their day without really understanding the deeper context. But if you actually look at what he's mad about, it's a way bigger deal than people realize. Genuinely bigger and more important than a 15-second clip getting passed around on social media. So here's the background you need to understand to really get what's happening here. First of all, Trump has been trying to get his own people installed as U.S. attorneys around the country, in states all over the map. These are powerful jobs. Seriously powerful jobs that most people don't think about, but that have enormous influence on how justice is administered across the country. These are the federal prosecutors who decide what cases get pursued in each individual state, who gets charged, who doesn't, and Trump wants loyalists in these seats, people he trusts completely, people who will do exactly what he wants them to do without any pushback or independent judgment that might conflict with his agenda. But there's this old Senate tradition called the blue slip that's been standing in his way. Basically, if you want to appoint a federal judge or a U.S. attorney in a certain state, the two senators from that state get a say in the matter. If either senator sends back a negative blue slip, that nomination can get stuck, sometimes permanently. And here's the thing, this rule has been around forever, literally over 100 years at this point. It's not new, it's not some Democrat conspiracy invented specifically to mess with Trump. It's just how the Senate has operated for generations under presidents from both parties going back decades and decades. But Trump hates it. Absolutely despises it with every fiber of his being. He's called it a hoax. He's called it horrible. He said Republicans should be ashamed of themselves for letting it continue. And the whole thing came to a head recently because of his own former lawyer, a woman named Alina Habba. Trump had put her in as the acting U.S. attorney for New Jersey, a powerful position overseeing federal prosecutions in that entire state. Problem is, a federal appeals court ruled that she had been serving unlawfully. She'd stayed in that temporary job way longer than the law actually allows, well past the legal limit. So she had to step down, forced out by the courts, not by choice, not by some political maneuver, but because the law simply didn't allow her to stay any longer. Now here's a detail that makes this even messier and helps explain why Trump was so worked up about the whole thing. The Trump administration actually tried to get creative to keep Habba in place. They pulled her official nomination back from Congress entirely, fired the court-appointed replacement who was supposed to take over, and then just reappointed Habba to a slightly different title within the same office, basically trying to sidestep the whole legal problem through a technicality, hoping nobody would notice or that they could somehow get away with it. But courts weren't buying it. They saw right through the maneuver and shut it down completely. That whole legal and bureaucratic maneuver became its own separate mess on top of the original blue slip slip fight, and is part of why Trump was clearly so worked up by the time he sat down for this Farmers Roundtable event. Because Haba wasn't just some random appointee to him. She was one of his most loyal defenders, someone who had represented him personally for years before this appointment. Losing her from that post because of an illegal technicality tied to the blue slip process and how long acting officials can serve apparently hit a real nerve with him, way deeper than losing just any random political appointee would have. So at this roundtable event with farmers, reporters ask him about Haba's resignation, and Trump goes on a 3-minute rant in front of the cameras about how the blue slip is horrible and how Grassley, the Senate Judiciary Chairman, needs to do something about it immediately. That part's expected, honestly. That's normal Trump complaining in public, which he does constantly on basically every topic under the sun. But here's where it gets interesting, where it goes from normal complaining to something else entirely. After the official part of the event wraps up and the press start getting shooed out of the room by aides thanking everybody for coming, the mics are still hot, still live. Nobody turned them off in time. And that's when Trump keeps going, except now it's not a polished complaint, crafted for the cameras anymore. Now it's raw, unfiltered, meant only for the people still standing in that room. He says again, almost to himself, that he can't appoint anybody. Everybody he's appointed, their time has expired, then they're in default, then they're losing. And in a longer version of the clip that later surfaced, he even goes further, saying he has about 7 attorneys who are about to lose their jobs because of this exact same issue across 7 different states. Now think about that for a second, really sit with it and let the implications sink in. This is the President of the United States privately admitting in a moment he clearly thought was off the record and out of earshot that his own administration is struggling to keep basic appointments in place across the country. That's not spin. That's not a talking point crafted by a communications team. That's an accidental, unscripted confession that things aren't going the way he wants them to behind the scenes. And here's why most people misunderstand this story when they see it online. A lot of folks just saw the clip and thought it was funny. Just another Trump gaffe, another meme, another 15 seconds of chaos to laugh at and scroll past on their phone. But that's honestly missing the real story here entirely. The real story is about power, about the actual limits of it, about how even with total control of the executive branch, even with his party holding the Senate, Trump is running into limits he can't just steamroll through no matter how hard he pushes. The blue slip tradition isn't a partisan Democrat trick designed to sabotage him specifically. It's a check, an actual long-standing check on presidential power that's held up for over a century through Republican and Democrat administrations alike. And Trump on a hot mic basically admitted that check is working exactly as intended, that it's actually stopping him from doing what he wants. And get this, even some Republicans agreed with him publicly after the clip went viral online. Representative Nancy Mace came out and said Trump wasn't wrong about the underlying complaint, comparing it to her own frustrations about Congress not delivering results for voters, saying she just written an op-ed, making basically the same point about House Republicans needing to actually deliver or risk losing their majority. Other Republicans in the House chimed in with similar takes, publicly siding with the frustration in the clip, even if the moment itself was clearly never meant to go public. So this wasn't purely a one-sided Democrat pile-on moment like you might expect from a clip like this. It split reactions in a pretty interesting way, with some conservatives actually backing up what Trump was venting about, even while critics used the exact same clip to paint him as panicked, frustrated, and out of control behind closed doors. That split reaction is honestly part of why the clip spread as fast as it did, because it gave both sides something to point at and say it proves their point. But here's the thing that connects all of this together, and this is honestly the part that should get your attention the most. Regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, this isn't the first time Trump's real, unfiltered feelings have leaked out through a hot mic or an unscripted moment caught on camera. We saw it with Access Hollywood back in 2005 when the world got an unfiltered, ugly look at how he talks about women when he thinks it's completely private. We saw it just last year with the Iran and Israel curse word moment when his frustration frustration boiled over in front of live cameras on the White House lawn, and now we're seeing it again with this blue slip meltdown. Except this time, the frustration isn't aimed at an enemy overseas or caught in some old tabloid interview. It's aimed inward this time at his own limitations, at the reality that even the most powerful office in the entire world still has rules built into it that he can't just bulldoze through with sheer force of will. So that's the deeper story here. The thing you actually need to understand, it's not really about one 15-second clip going viral for a day. It's about a repeating pattern of Trump's true unscripted reactions constantly slipping out in ways that reveal something very different from the image his team spends millions of dollars trying to project. Confidence and total control in public every single time the cameras are rolling on purpose. Frustration, even something close to panic in private every single time he thinks nobody's actually listening. All right, so let's break this down into what actually matters, because there's a lot going on here. And I want to make sure you walk away from this understanding the real point, not just the meme version of the story that's been bouncing around online. This hot mic moment exposes a gap between Trump's public image and his private reality. And that gap is the whole story here. In public, Trump is always winning, always strong, always in total control of every situation. No exceptions ever. That's the brand. That's been the core brand for basically a decade now. Built up over countless rallies and interviews and speeches, over merchandise and slogans and campaign promises about never backing down. But on a hot mic, when he thinks nobody's listening, the actual words coming out of his mouth are about losing, about being blocked, about not being able to do what he wants to do. That gap between the polished public performance and the raw private admission is exactly why this clip blew up the way it did online. People aren't just laughing at a random gaffe here. They're seeing an actual crack in the armor, a rare unscripted moment where the marketing and the reality don't line up. And honestly, those moments are gold for anybody trying to understand what's really happening behind the scenes in this administration. This is about actual structural limits on presidential power, not just political drama or a funny clip. The blue slip tradition isn't some random Senate quirk invented recently to specifically annoy Trump. It's a long-standing, century-old check that both parties have used and complained about over the years, depending on who's in the White House at the time. And what this moment shows clearly is that even with Republicans controlling plenty of the government right now, there are still structural limits built into the system that a sitting president simply cannot wish away or overpower through sheer force. Trump wants total control over who gets appointed as a federal prosecutor in every single state in the country. The blue slip stands directly in the way of that goal. And on a hot mic, he basically confirmed in his own words that is actually working against him. This fits into a much bigger pattern with Trump and unscripted moments that goes back years and years. We're talking about a guy who's had multiple hot mic or off-script incidents come to define entire chapters of his political career. Access Hollywood in 2005, which nearly sank his first campaign entirely when it finally surfaced publicly in 2016. The curse word about Iran and Israel from last year, an actual on-camera profanity from a sitting president, which presidential historians said was basically unprecedented in American history. The kind of thing that just doesn't happen from the Oval Office, no matter how frustrated a president gets. And now this blue slip rant. 3 separate moments, years apart from each other, all revealing something raw and unfiltered that Trump clearly never intended the public to actually hear. That's not just a coincidence happening randomly, that's a real documented pattern. And honestly, if history is any guide here, it almost certainly won't be the last one either. What happens next actually matters here quite a bit, so pay attention. The blue slip fight isn't over, not even close. Trump is still actively pushing Senate Republicans, including Judiciary Chairman Grassley by name, to get rid of the tradition entirely and permanently. So far, most Senate Republicans haven't budged an inch on this. They're holding on to this old rule, even while their own president is publicly fuming about it on camera and apparently off camera too. That tension isn't going away anytime anytime soon. And every single time another Trump appointee gets blocked, delayed, or forced out because of this exact rule, expect more of these frustrated, unscripted moments to keep leaking out into the public eye. So why does any of this actually matter for you sitting there watching this right now? Because these hot mic moments aren't just entertainment, aren't just something to laugh at for a few seconds. They're a rare, genuinely honest window into how the most powerful person in the country actually thinks and reacts the moment the performance stops. And when that window keeps showing frustration, panic, and open admissions of losing over and over again, that tells you something real about the state of things happening behind closed doors in Washington right now, today, this year. This also matters because it shows you pretty clearly that power in this country still has real checks built into it, even when the people in charge don't particularly like those checks. Trump can complain all he wants about the blue slip. He can call it a hoax, call it horrible, rant about it in public speeches, and apparently in private moments too. But the rule is still there. It's still standing. It's still actively working exactly the way it was designed to work generations ago. And that's honestly a pretty important thing for all of us to understand about how our government actually functions day to day, especially with everything else going on in Washington right now. And keep an eye on this going forward because there's real money and real power riding on how it plays out. If Trump manages to actually convince Grassley and other Senate Republicans to kill off the blue slip entirely, that would be a massive shift in how federal prosecutors and judges get appointed nationwide for every future president, not just him. If he doesn't get his way, expect this exact frustration to keep boiling over on camera and off again and again, every single time another one of his picks gets stuck in the process. So here's where we're actually at with all of this. Trump got caught again saying something raw and unfiltered that he clearly never meant for the public to hear or see. The clip went completely viral within hours. Reactions split pretty sharply between Republicans agreeing with his underlying frustration and critics calling it an accidental confession of failure. And meanwhile, the actual fight over the blue slip tradition, the thing that set this whole chain of events off in the first place, is nowhere near resolved and probably won't be anytime soon. This is far from the last hot mic moment we're going to see out of this administration. Mark my words on that, because if there's one single thing we know for certain about Trump at this point, after everything we've watched over the years, it's that cameras and microphones have a funny way of catching him exactly when he thinks they're off. Stay tuned because, trust me, this one's not going away anytime soon.